How are you guys all doing tonight? Good? Well, I'm feeling great for a Monday. And my name is Adrienne, and I want to welcome you to our first ever ELEO Conference 2013. We're so excited for tonight. We have a great lineup of speakers and sessions planned for you. As you saw in the video earlier, you have a taste of what's to come in your programs, and we also have eco-friendly pens for you guys. So being in California, right, only makes sense that they be eco-friendly, so feel free to take notes throughout the night. Before we get started, I want to mention a few things as well. So if you guys, first of all, haven't used the restrooms yet, they are available for you. They are in the back of the auditorium and also in the lobby. So if nature calls, you now know where to go. Feel free to use them. Second, social media. For those of you guys who are on Twitter and actually use your Twitter accounts, or can't get enough of Facebook, we have you covered. We have a hashtag, ELEO 2013. So feel free to share with your friends and family anything you find interesting throughout the night, any nuggets of wisdoms or insights that you've gotten. Feel free to make them feel jealous that you're here and they're not. So go for it. We won't stop you. All right. So again, like I said, we're really excited for tonight. And we also really want to share with you guys why we started the ELEO conference, what this is all about, and the vision behind it. And to share that with you, I'm going to invite Roberto Ortiz to come up on the stage. So let's give him a welcome.
Hello, everybody. So we've been putting this event on for the past 2 months, and I'm so excited to see everyone here. The turnout and the response for ELEO has been overwhelming. Again, my name is Roberto, and I'm one of the guys behind ELEO. And before we get started, I just want to address what is ELEO. I know some guys are wondering, okay, what is ELEO? What do you guys stand for? And what's next? So about a year ago, my wife, my buddy Jerry, you'll hear from him in a little bit. We started having like these meetups here at South Bay, and we focused on entrepreneurship and leadership. We said, let's just have this meetup and see who wants to come out. And the response, again, overwhelming. And so a few months ago, we were challenged. We took a step of faith and said, okay, let's go beta. Let's try the beta conference. And so here we are at ELEO 2013, the intersection of entrepreneurship and leadership. Now, before we kick off the show, I want to thank a few people, critical people. Right now, today, we have about 60 volunteers that volunteered to put this together, so why don't we give them a hand. Also, we have a core team of about 10 people that have been meeting over Google Hangouts. And you guys know that I'm a Google guy, and we had to use Google Hangouts for this entire thing. That was a requirement. But they've been, every Monday night we get together and we talk about ELEO. So why don't we give them a hand. And last but not least, we just want to thank South Bay for being so generous and letting us host ELEO 2013 here in their house. Thank you. All right, so let's kick things off. Now, for the first and last session, we've carved out a segment for Q&A for the audience. So as you have questions, there'll be a microphone in each aisle. You can make your way towards those. Also, we're going to be swift but powerful. So just get ready to just like take in as much as possible, as most conferences are. And lastly, we just want to tell you guys that we are honored to have you here tonight. We've been working on this, like I said, heads down, and we didn't know what we were going to get, but the response has been overwhelming. So without further ado, why don't we welcome our founders on stage. So we're going to kick off the founders panel. And so let me do a quick intro of these guys, and then I want them to share a little bit about their company and the current happenings, because a lot of us are familiar with your companies, but we want to know what's currently happening and get familiar with what's going on. So here we have Chase Adam, and he's the founder of Watsi, the first nonprofit to be accepted into Y Combinator. We have Victor who's CEO and founder of FiveStars Card. It's a loyalty company that's crushing it in that arena. And we have Jerry Shen. He has a CEO and co-founder of a fantasy mobile company, Bignoggins. And so why don't we give him a hand? So first of all, guys, thanks for coming out. Now, why don't you guys let us know who you are a little bit more, your company, and the current happenings with it.
Should I start?
Go for it.
All right. So, like Roberto said, my name is Jerry, and about 3 years ago, I was playing around on my iPhone, and I was really upset because I couldn't manage my fantasy sports teams. And like any entrepreneur, I try to solve my own problem, and I created an app on the App Store that helped people manage their fantasy sports teams. If you're familiar with fantasy sports, it's basically, yeah, nice. Fantasy. How many fantasy sports fans we got out there? Awesome. So basically, Fantasy Monster was the name of the app, and ran it for about 3 years. It was bootstrapped, never took any funding, but ended up being fairly successful, and it was recently acquired by Yahoo about a month ago. So I've kind of been there ever since, and right now I'm running the fantasy sports group at Yahoo.
Good deal. So now you're director of engineering at Yahoo.
That's right.
And so when we dive into some leadership questions, we want to hear what's going on in that arena.
Thanks for having me. My name's Chase Adam, and I work with an organization called Watsi. This will be my one long-winded answer of the evening, but I'll give you the quick story behind the organization. So about 2 years ago, I was actually serving as a Peace Corps volunteer in Costa Rica, and I was traveling on a bus right on the Panama-Costa Rica border. And this woman got on the bus and started asking all the local passengers for donations to pay for her son's medical treatment. And I remember being skeptical. I think anyone here that's traveled in the developing world, people ask you for money all the time, and you kind of build up this wall, you're always a little skeptical. But what was different about this one woman was that all the local passengers seemed to trust her and start giving her donations. And I couldn't understand, why do all these people trust this stranger? And it was because she had her son's medical record with her. It was in this red folder. She was actually passing it around the bus, definitely not HIPAA compliant. People were like digging through his information, grilling this woman with questions. She seemed to earn their trust, and I'd say probably close to 2/3 of this bus donated, the equivalent of 25 cents, 50 cents to this woman. I pitched in $2. I didn't want to be like that one stingy gringo or foreigner that doesn't donate when all these local farmers are donating. And the woman got off the bus, and I remember having an epiphany and thinking, it's so crazy that with the internet we can crowdfund creative projects on Kickstarter. We can crowdfund microloans for people all around the world on Kiva. Why on earth is there not a crowdfunding platform for healthcare? So that was the inspiration behind Watsi. We're essentially Kickstarter for healthcare. We launched 9 months ago, and it's been a roller coaster ever since.
Awesome. All right, hey guys, my name is Victor. I'm one of the founders of FiveStars, and where it was all born from was me and my co-founder. We were in New York together, and we worked at a firm called McKinsey, where we did customer engagement and loyalty programs for a number of Fortune 500 companies. Macy's, Sephora, for example, Starbucks. Et cetera. And one of the biggest issues that makes absolutely no sense is you go online and you shop on Amazon, and that experience today is more customized and more personal than when you go into a real store with like a real live person. Because you sign online and they know who you are, they know what you've bought, they can recommend things to you based on your behavior and your taste. But then you go into your local coffee store, and even though you go there, every single week, multiple times a week, you walk in and you're this faceless person, and they probably don't even remember what your last order is, and let alone all that. But you kind of go to the counter. You hand them your credit card, they might not even make eye contact, and then they give you your card back. So overall, it's this kind of realization that the world has become a very, very transactional place, and we felt like with some basic technology and tools provided to these business owners, we can make it much more relational. So kind of with that goal in mind, we jumped ship about 2.5 years ago, decided to forego our career in finance to eat ramen and noodles and out of a garage, and we just work day and night in the same house. And from then on, it's just been a huge rocket ship. So today, coming out of Y Combinator about 2.5 years ago, we're now about 100 employees. We have a couple thousand stores across the country, a little over 1.5 million users, and it's just been a huge journey, and I'm excited to share everything we've learned along the way with you guys today.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So we all know that, in the Valley, there's always some people that have an idea, right, to start a company, to say, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur, I want to go and run with it. Now, there's one thing about being a leader, however, that you vision cast, right? What was it when you first started Watsi, Bignoggins, even at Yahoo and at FiveStars, that you, for the first initial employees, that you said, hey, I need you to come run with me. I need you, this is my vision, this is what I think we can accomplish. How did you carry out that conversation and communicate that vision to those initial people?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at that. So I think the core of it actually is that you just need to know what the vision is for yourself first. And I would start there, because I think a lot of times for an entrepreneur, you might be doing it just because you want to get into a startup, or you might see something because you think it's a big opportunity. But really being introspective and understanding at a core level why you're motivated to put your life on the line, to bet, risk everything essentially to go out there and pursue a dream. And being able to articulate that in a way that you can understand yourself and you can communicate is the first and most important thing. And for me, honestly, it was a lot of soul searching and a lot of thinking, because I knew I wanted to do startup. I knew I had this vision of making the world more relational. But as an entrepreneur, it was really day in and day out, just like execution. Me and two other guys kind of in a room grinding it out. And overall, we kind of implicitly know why we're doing what we're doing, but to be able to package it and articulate it and be on the same page with your co-founders, because you all have different motives, was a really important thing. And for us, it was kind of coming to the core of, hey, it's not just loyalty, it's not just this opportunity with bridging point of sale systems and data and identity and all the business reasons, but it's this underlying truth of we felt like we could make the world more relational and that it had become too transactional. And going from there to kind of build out this vision and endgame picture of one day you will in the next 10 years walk into a store and they will know who you are. And they will greet you at the door by your name, because it does not make any sense that 94% of commerce is in brick and mortar and you are still anonymous. And so we felt that with our technology and our approach, we could be primely positioned in order to do that. And through that, I'll expand on it later, but a lot of things can come from that, whether it be philanthropy, whether it be our vision of just building more tight-knit communities, et cetera. And kind of once you can articulate that, you will have the natural passion, I think, to attract people as you tell them why you're doing what you're doing, and then get them excited about the vision.
I'll jump in. It's funny, so we have like the mid-stage guy here, late-stage guy here. I'm the early-stage guy, so I'll probably just share all my mistakes with you that we're still making. They've both figured it out, I'm sure. With me, this is going to be a bit of a strange answer, but I actually think the best entrepreneurs don't ever self-identify as entrepreneurs, and I think that a lot of the best leaders actually don't self-identify as leaders. But I remember when I was starting Watsi, I don't know if it was one of Paul Graham's essays or something I read on TechCrunch, but I read that if you can't get your friends to buy into your idea, that it's probably a bad idea. And so when I first had the idea for Watsi, I was convinced that this was like the best idea in the world. It was the best idea I'd ever had. But I thought, I need social proof. I need to go out there and convince my friends that this is a good idea, so that I then believe it. And so I went out and I convinced my two friends. It took like 1 hour. It was actually way easier than I expected. And they bought it. And I was like, that's easy. And then about 6 months later, I realized that those are probably the two worst people in the world that are working with me on this project. And I'm really lucky it's a nonprofit, because if this was a for-profit, those guys probably would have owned like 33% of the company. It would have been a nightmare. So with me, what I found was that I think it's important to bring people into your idea, but like Victor said, I think it's really important to buy into your own vision first. And I found that as soon as I really bought into Watsi and I believed it 100%, every single great person on our team, every one of our investors, every one of our partners has found us. We haven't gone out and found a single person. And I think that that's honestly probably the best way to do it.
Yeah, so I think for me, it's a little bit different, because, these guys went big, they have huge visions. But for me, my vision actually wasn't all that big. I just really wanted to manage my fantasy football team on my phone, right? So, that was basically my vision. And so initially when I started, I kind of say this as a joke, but I'm serious. Like, the only person I really had to convince was my mom, because she's like one of those super conservative Asian mothers. So even though like I was like, look, Mom, I am #1 on the App Store. Can I please quit my job? And she was like, no, you have, a very stable job. You must stay at your job, right? And then I'd be like, but Mom, this is fantasy football. Like, a lot of people love it. It's like, what's fantasy football? That sounds bad. And so, for me, really, like, I kind of say this jokingly, but for me, it wasn't really the vision that I had to convince other people to join me. I never hired any employees. But for me, it was just more of just convincing myself that this was a good step to take. Like, I think Chase said it, where a lot of entrepreneurs don't really self-identify as such or as leaders. And for me, I never thought of myself as an entrepreneur. I worked for Lockheed Martin, which is a really conservative company. I thought I would stay there for a long time. And I kind of accidentally jumped into this, right? I started an app to kind of, not to sell it, but to kind of use it myself. And it ended up being the #1 sports app in the App Store. And so for me, it was really a question of, okay, now what? Do I take advantage of this opportunity, or do I let it slip? It's like that Eminem song, Lose Yourself, right? Are you going to take the opportunity, or are you going to let it slip you by? And that's really how I felt. I was like, there's this opportunity that's presented in front of me. Am I going to take it? So that was 3 years ago. I think over the past 3 years, though, I've realized that it's very lonely to do a company by yourself, which is what I've been doing for the past 3 years. And, I had Roberto come on board part-time. I had another guy helping me out with Android. But the day-to-day stuff, it was just me by myself in my home office, right? Whereas these guys have co-founders and employees. And so I guess the second part of the answer is, now that I'm at Yahoo, it's totally different, right? I'm managing a team. I have to sell them on the vision. Not all of them are as into fantasy sports as I am. And so I feel like now is kind of where I'm really learning this for the first time, is how do I sell that vision? Over the past 3 years, I've really learned that sports is a really unique niche, because a lot of technologists aren't really interested in sports, right? So if you look at the top sports apps on the App Store, generally they're not very good quality. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there that's really just ripe for the taking, right? And so the trick is just really selling these engineers on my team that aren't really into sports to say, hey, look, this is an interesting space to go into. This is an area where we could not only produce the best fantasy app, but we could maybe change the thinking on digital sports in general, because not a lot of people your caliber are thinking about this anywhere. And so that's really my challenge right now, is just selling the vision of, hey, you're a MIT, Stanford, Berkeley computer science grad. You could work on any problem out there, right? You can go to Google and work on a huge search engine, or you can come and work on fantasy sports. And that's a tough sell. Yeah. So that's a big challenge, right? But yeah, it is what it is right now.
Let's go internal now. Now we were talking about like how do you sell your initial, whether they're investors or first employees, but now, like Victor, you have like 100 employees. Right, and this is a big responsibility. These folks are in there working hard. How do you, and this is for everyone, how do you push your employees to work beyond their mission? I mean, beyond what they're comfortable with, without pushing them too far, right, as a leader?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question, and I have many scars and tears to sort of show for this one. So first thing is, I think it varies actually quite a bit depending on your size and your stage, because when I was doing that when we were 5 people, completely different than when we were 40, completely different than now when we're 100, and I'm sure if we keep growing it'll be completely different again. So my background before McKinsey, I was an investment banker at Goldman Sachs. My typical week was you work like 120 hours a week. And that was kind of the mindset of startup I wanted to impose on everyone I worked with, because it's like, hey, when you work really hard, that's what it looks like, because that's just where I came from. And I think early on when you're smaller, it's actually it's much easier to keep a sense of urgency and keep people accountable, because it's literally me, my co-founder, and like 6 other guys in a living room, and you're like shoulder to shoulder. You leave for lunch and you come back and the whole place just smells like body odor. Like it's so tight that it's actually unconscious. You don't have to do anything. You just, for me at least at that point, I'm sure everyone's stories may be different, but for me at least, it was they will be a reflection naturally of my personal passion and desire to get something out because we're working in such close quarters all the time. Now, when we grew from there to 20 to 40, that range, it becomes different where we had a bigger office, and you have to have standard, you have to develop a cadence for your employees and your team. So for example, for us, we had a weekly stand-up. Every Sunday, we work 6 days a week, so we had our town hall every Sunday, every week. Every Sunday, people would take turns going up and they would do their stand-up about what they did that week, and we developed kind of a cadence around that. However, once we passed the 40 mark, everything changed and became much more difficult. So, Vinod Khosla has a good article about this, but he says that up until 40 employees, you kind of have this hub and spoke model where you have your founders at the center, and they can essentially keep in touch with everyone in the company. Like when we were 40 people, I was talking to everyone every day. I knew the ins and outs. I knew like when they broke up with a girlfriend, or when their parents were having trouble. You know everything about them. However, once we pass that point, it becomes exceedingly more difficult as you have to put in a layer of middle managers, and there's more reporting structures and all these things that came into place. So for us, and this is really close to home because I've been working on it for the past 6 months, it was being really explicit about defining our mission statement, our vision, our values, and just implementing company-wide OKRs and then distilling them down through each group and through each of my leaders on the executive team. But overall, I think the key for me is getting out of the entrepreneurial mindset of kind of like managed chaos, just like run around and try your best to get something to happen, which works really well when you're in pure execution mode, to one of kind of coordination and cross-functional teamwork, and being really explicit about distilling down to like the very new guy that you just hired about why they're here and why they're doing what they're doing. And Jay's a good example. We have a new sales class this morning of, we had 9 people and 2 new developers. And so now we have a week orientation, and I sat them down and I have this deck I go through about our mission and our founding story and our values and all these fluffy things that today, if I could do one thing different, just like one thing different about my whole last 2.5 years, it would have been to write down my mission statement and my values from day one, rather than scramble to do it much later when it was too big and it kind of came onto us.
Good deal.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think in preparation for this conference, I was thinking about leadership a lot. And I think it seems counterintuitive, but I don't know if anyone out here has read Good to Great by Jim Collins. It's a great book. It's one of my favorite. I'm not really big on self-help or management or those types of books, but it's actually really good. And he has something that he calls like the level 5 leader. And so he looked at all the companies that basically did really well for a sustained period of time, not just a quick spike, but for 10 to 15 years. And then he compared the leaders of all those companies. And what he found was that the best leaders aren't these celebrity CEOs. They don't ride in on horseback. They're not great at interviews. Oftentimes they're slightly introverts, and the one quality they'll possess is that they're really good at motivating and empowering people, about giving people ownership. And I think that's actually true, especially in the tech sector. Like, think about the big companies. Think about Mark Zuckerberg. Like, Mark Zuckerberg is not the equivalent of a politician. Think about Larry and Sergey. Like, they're not these like riding in on horseback CEOs. Even Steve Jobs, to a certain extent, wasn't really. And I think how to empower people or how to keep your team engaged, I think it can be summed up in one of my favorite quotes about leadership, and that's the best leaders you oftentimes don't even know they're there. Their aim gets fulfilled, their work gets done, and everyone at the company says, I did it myself.
Yeah, so I can speak to this because of kind of an immediate situation that happened. So basically, technically the deal closed a month ago, but I was actually kind of there a month before, kind of undercover, because we had to integrate my technology with Yahoo's and ship it before people started doing fantasy football. So we basically had the challenge of integrating 2 really large and disparate code bases in a month, and then QAing for 2 weeks and then releasing, which nobody thought was realistic, right? But it had to get done because unless the NFL changes their schedule, we had to ship on time. And so one of the things I was worried about is, great, I mean, I've been doing this for 3 years, but it's just been me, right? If I have the job and I take it upon myself, I don't think it's going to happen. So it was really about trust. Like, I had to trust the people that reported to me to get it done. And I didn't know any of these people, right? These people didn't even know each other because there was another acquisition that came in like a few weeks before, and there were all these new faces, and it was literally like a brand new team. It was kind of like a expansion draft, right? And they threw all of us together, and they were like, okay, now go build the next generation of fantasy football. You have 1.5 months, go. And so for the past 2 months, it's just been like heads down, crazy, literally like, 24/7, as my wife can attest to, right? And the challenge of it was not everyone on my team was crazy about fantasy sports, right? And so in order to get them to produce beyond what they thought they were capable of, I couldn't sell them on, hey, look, you guys are working on fantasy sports, because I was one of the few sports fans on the team. So it was really about getting to know them. So I scheduled one-on-ones with literally every single person on the team. And I'm like, what are you interested in? What brought you to Yahoo? What's going to get you to stay? What do you want to work on that is going to, keep you motivated, right? And it's different for everybody. And so one of the things about managing software engineers is that they're not interchangeable, right? People have their own interests, people have their own skill sets. You can't just like take one out and replace them with another engineer. They're totally different. And so what I had to do was try to find that, that passion within each and every one of them and say, okay, you're passionate about really pushing the pixels on the screen. So I think you should work on these views and make them look awesome. You're passionate about really having a great back end and making sure it's stable. You can work on that part of the code, right? And Jim Collins, actually, I think it's from his book. He has a quote where he says, leadership is all about, I'm probably going to murder this quote, but it's all about getting the right people on the bus, getting the wrong people off the bus, and then putting the right people in the right seats, right? Even before you start driving. And so that was kind of my attitude from day one, is like, all right, let's make sure everybody's in the right seats. If somebody needs to leave the bus, let's make sure that we do that. And somebody actually did leave the team, unfortunately. But yeah, it was definitely a huge challenge, right? But now, as a result of kind of like being basically put into the fire and just having to work together as a team to meet an essentially impossible deadline, like the team has gelled really well. And it's probably one of the funnest teams that I've ever been on, right? One of the things that I always tell my team is, we're like a locker room, right? I like to use sports analogies because I'm a sports guy. They don't understand half my analogies, so I have to explain it. But the best championship teams always have great locker rooms, right? It's not just about the on-court performance, it's off-court stuff. Like, do you guys hang out off the court? Do you guys like joke around? Right? And so I've really tried hard to kind of instill that locker room mentality on my team. And so I think that's helped a lot.
Good deal, good deal. So we're about to get into some Q&A soon, so if you have some questions, feel free to get into any of the aisles. There's microphones on the right and the left sides. So one question before we go into Q&A. When leadership comes to mind, like a leader, who comes to mind for you guys? Who do you go for like advice, like leadership advice?
So that's a tough one. At the risk of sounding like I'm sucking up, I really do think Marissa Mayer at Yahoo is a fantastic leader.
Is she watching the live stream?
I hope so. But no, really I do, because like ever since I got there, I would ask, like, my favorite question to ask my fellow colleagues is like, well, what do you think of Yahoo, right? What kept you going all these years? There's a guy on my team that's been there for 13 years. And we always joke around, it's like, hey, when you started, were you on dial-up? Like, did you ship code on floppy drives? Like, what? 13 years, that's crazy. And then he told me that in his 13 years at Yahoo, this past year with Marissa has been by far the best. And I asked him why. And basically he says, because we're all rowing in the same direction again, right? And people believe, and you can sense there's a palpable energy there that wasn't there before. And so I really, I've only interacted with her a couple of times, but I can just tell by the way that she leads and the way that she vision casts that people want to follow her. Like, I think that's a key to being a great leader, right? If nobody wants to follow you, you're probably not a great leader. And so far, literally every single person I've talked to at Yahoo really likes her and wants to follow her, even if they disagree with some of her decisions.
Good point.
At first, all the big names came to mind. You have the, Martin Luther King Jr. and Steve Jobs and all of that. But one person I was just reading about is this guy, Zhang Qinghao in China. He's the wealthiest man in China. He's worth $11.6 billion. He started a beverage company. And he spends less than $20 a day and eats lunch with his employees. And a news reporter asked him why he doesn't buy a nicer house. He's lived in the same house almost his entire life. And he said, because the view would distract me from my work. And I thought that was actually pretty cool. And this company, it's one of the most profitable companies in China. They've seen sustained growth 60% annually since inception. And that's, those are the kind of guys that aren't necessarily on the front page of the New York Times, but they're empowering people, building awesome, sustainable companies, and they're just humble human beings. I think those are the types of people that I really look up to, and I think are sort of the under-recognized awesome leaders of today.
Great.
I don't have a good answer, other than if I had to say it from a characteristics perspective. I feel like we're overly endorsing Jim Collins, which I don't necessarily want to do. But the two things that stuck out to me the most and that we've tried to build our organization by is the concept of, he said, the level 5 managers, there's two characteristics they all have. One is fierce professional will, and then that's the idea that they're relentless, they're tenacious, they don't give up. And then the second is deep personal humility. And this like self-effactiveness where they're not always in the spotlight and they're there to empower and to lift people up. And for us, I think rather than me naming like one of the great leaders out there that, I think there's a lot of people we all look up to, but the realization for me was understanding that in order to scale my organization, I had to empower every single person down to the customer service rep to be a leader themselves and to realize that they are the CEOs of their own realm, whatever that is. And for us, that meant baking it into our cultural values. So, our values are, number one, shared humility. It comes from Jim Collins. 2 is authentic relationships and about investing in relationships, bring your whole self to work, the personal, the professional. 3rd is warrior spirit, and that's never give up, that's hustle. And then the 4th one that unites them all is joy every day, and about doing all those things in a way that's joyful and that kind of just makes you happier and is optimistic, because there's ways to do warrior spirit like the Goldman Sachs way, which is depressing and it sucks. And there's like the joyful way. And those are the qualities that we came with that we decided were our core values that really reverberated from what we thought a good leader looked like. And the biggest mindset shift for me was realizing that the leader I look up to is not like just Steve Jobs, it's not Bill Gates, but it's my sales rep who's there day in and day out and master of his domain. And it's my office manager who is there providing the entire organization with immeasurable leverage by what she does day in, day out, and instilling that mindset into them.
Good deal. All right, so let's open up for some Q&A from the audience. I have some mic problems there.
Hi, this question is for Jerry. Why Yahoo? Did you approach them or they came to you? Please don't say Marissa Mayer.
That's a good question. I actually surprisingly get asked this a lot. The easy answer is if you want to do sports and you want to be in technology, there's not many options out there. Yahoo, ESPN, that's pretty much it, right? And so there's a short list. But even then, it's like, I guess the underlying question is why Yahoo and not just staying independent? It's not like I wasn't doing well as an independent startup. And I think the answer to that really is, first of all, I wanted to be in a place where I could make a bigger impact. And first of all, I would say that don't believe what you read in the press, because a lot of times, Yahoo can get unfairly vilified in the press. But really, when I went there and I spoke with the people that were on the ground doing the work, I was very impressed with what I saw. And I was impressed with the leadership. And they basically sold me on the vision and said, look, we're acquiring all of these companies. we're putting them on the same floor. We're basically running it as a startup incubator, and we're entrusting the future of the company to you guys, right? It's going to be a mobile-first company. She said this at every earnings call, and that's all happening on this one floor at Yahoo, and it was just a really exciting place. And I felt like the opportunity that was presented, just like before, the opportunity that was presented by my app doing well in the App Store, I felt like this was a similar opportunity. And I really had to ask myself, do I want to keep going at it on my own, but really making a limited impact? Or do I want to go to a place like Yahoo and really take part in what I believe will be one of the greatest turnarounds in Silicon Valley history? Like if you look at Silicon Valley history, there's been very few legitimate turnarounds of internet giants or just tech giants, right? I mean, Apple comes to mind, obviously. But I wanted to be a part of that. And I think it takes a certain type of person to want to be part of that turnaround. It's not glamorous. It's dirty work, right? And it's hustle. But those are the things that kind of ring true for me as an entrepreneur. Like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be part of the underdog, right? And so I think that was, I said a lot of things there, but I think ultimately I felt like both the job that was waiting for me at Yahoo and the direction that the company was going was kind of tailor-made for me personally. And so that's why I agreed to the acquisition.
Fair enough. Anybody else on the mics? Hey, you guys can just start lining up over here by these microphones.
Hey, my question is, have you ever missed a deadline? And if so, how do you handle that? I've been doing a lot of software where, the deadline slips, or we had a date in mind when we wanted to get it done, but that just didn't happen. And that tends to be a big challenge for me.
I'll interject really
Thanks.
quickly. Unless it's externally unless it's an external deadline, we don't have deadlines because we kept missing them so much. So it's kind of like what Jerry said about the NFL starting, and you just kind of have to make it by that date. So that's the short answer.
Yeah, I guess I'll talk a little bit about deadlines. So, like I mentioned, there was a crazy deadline when I came on board. And really, when you talk about software development, right, one of the trickiest things is figuring out the balance between your time, your resources, and the schedule, right? Something's got to go. So if you have a deadline and you don't feel like you have the time or the resources to hit that deadline, you've got to be really clear to all the stakeholders that, hey, listen, we can deliver by this time, but we can't deliver everything that we initially promised. And that's kind of my job as a leader, to really protect my engineers from that, right? And say, look, these guys are busting their butts. But even still, we're working night and day. We cannot deliver on every single feature. So let's prioritize what we think are going to be most valuable to the user. Let's prioritize what we think are going to be the highest returns on our invested time. And let's just start knocking them out. And when we ship, let's just make sure it's a good quality app. Let's make sure there's no crashes. Let's make sure there's no memory leaks. But aside from that, there's that 80-20 rule, right? Where 80% of the features that your users use only take 20% of your time. And so I think that comes from experience, trying to figure out what that is. But I think as a software leader, that's kind of your job to make that known to the stakeholders that might not necessarily know that.
Sure. It's always a bummer to miss a deadline. It's like we failed, but we didn't. Yeah.
This question is to Victor. You mentioned earlier how coming up with a mission statement and your values is one of the things you wish you'd come up with much earlier. So question is, one, what is FiveStars' mission statement? What was your process for coming up with that mission statement? And how have you seen that statement help you as you grew? That's what you mentioned, one of the things that you come up with earlier.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So our mission statement is to help businesses and communities thrive by turning every transaction into a relationship. And this harkens back to what I was saying earlier about our belief that the world is too transactional. And I could go on for a lot more than my allotted time about our mission statement and the depth of it and how excited we are about it. But suffice it to say that, for us, it's just coming with one thing that's simple, that's succinct, that unites our purpose as a company, and we use it to drive everything from sales tactics to our product development timeline, to even fundraising and choosing investors. And so the process of coming up with it, I think the important thing there is that there's a temptation when you come up with a mission statement to just come up with something flashy or really exciting or that looks good on paper, like, I want to Google, I was like, best 10 mission and vision statements, and I was reading Googles and Yahoos and Facebooks and everyone's, and you want to come up with something grandiose. But ultimately, I think the core of it is that you have to really understand, and this kind of goes back to what I said earlier, what you want to do at a root level and what you think will make you happy and make you successful. And this is really not just for yourself, but for your entire leadership team or your co-founders. So for me personally, I identify myself as a Christian, and it was spending a lot of time just praying, understanding why I was doing what I was doing, and getting my entire leadership team to really understand what they were as well. And this was a process that for us took weeks. I mean, maybe almost an entire month to come up with our mission statement and our values. And so all that to say, I think you need to bring your whole self into it, not just the professional, but your personal and who you are. Do the same for your leadership team. Have them bring their personal selves, what really resonates with them at a root level, and then don't rush it, because it's going to guide everything going forward. And one simple example is when we were fundraising, we had this, this vision for relationships. And for our Series A, I think I talked to like 60 VCs, some outrageous amount, because I was convinced that if we were going to give away part of our company and there's going to be people on our board making decisions, I needed to make absolutely sure they were on board with kind of like the social vision and impact that we wanted for our company. And what that meant was that a lot of investors, some very prestigious who wanted to give us money, we had to turn down because we were very explicit about, hey, like, when push comes to shove, some point it's going to be about profit or making the world like more philanthropic, more connected, more relational. This is our mission statement. And we had to pick, turn down their money. And what that ended up meaning for us is we were like, our last payroll got funded by my life savings. And if we missed that, we would have been done. But fortunately, we had the right investors come through the door who are in line with that. And that's just one example, but there are many that our mission statement, directed the outcomes of.
Good deal. We have time for just one quick question and answer.
No pressure, huh? My question to you is, obviously as you're starting out, you have limited resources, limited time. How do you prioritize ruthlessly to decide to focus on the right things? And especially, a lot of times you could get bogged down with internal activity versus acquisition. Like, how do you make the choice about where you're going to spend your time and resources to grow as you've incredibly done?
Who wants to take that one to wrap it up?
So I'm a big believer that constraints actually force your brain to be creative, right? If you lived in a world without constraints, I think everybody would be lazy. At least I would. Like it tends to happen, right? Like you think about, you have a day where you have no deadlines, you just tend to kind of like fill your day with just random things, right? But all of a sudden you say, hey, you got to get this done by 3 p.m. and you're just heads down, you're on it, and you don't even think about whether or not you can get it done or not. You just do it. And I found that to be true time and time again. Like, I operate the best under a set of constraints. Like, the more constraints, almost the better, because I don't know what it is just tweak something in your brain that forces you to have creative solutions, right? I mean, I think you can take any big breakthrough out there, and chances are it was made under a set of constraints, right? I've never heard of somebody saying, hey, I had unlimited resources and I came up with this groundbreaking idea. I mean, it just doesn't really happen. And so I think that would be my answer. I would say embrace constraints and just know that those constraints will force you to be creative.
Awesome. Why don't we give these guys a hand? Yeah.
2 turntables, and a mic. microphone.